The last light of evening died slow over Fernley, Nevada, turning the sheet metal roofs along West Main into dull coins that wouldn't ever be cashed. In the open bay of Field's Auto, Omari stood with a grease-blackened rag and looked at the puddle under a '97 Silverado as if the dark thing could answer any of his questions. The radiator hissed like a mad cat, his phone on the bench kept buzzing with the landlord's name, Martha Kaskin, a square of threat that seemed to vibrate louder than the radio. He told himself he had until Friday. People told themselves a lot of things. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. He shut the radio off. Silence fell thick with hot dust and the sweet metallic tang of coolant. The Silverado's owner had promised to come back with the other half of the money by noon. It was past 8. Nyla's text, "Got rice and beans?" "You eat," sat unanswered, a small sister voice inside a life that felt like a truck on jack stands, up in the air, wheels off, vulnerable. Across the street, the diner's neon fork flickered. Lupita, who ran it with an iron ladle and a soft laugh, was flipping the closed sign even though she would always let Omari in if he knocked. The long lot beyond the last street lamp leaned into desert darkness where trains breathed, low and steady. He liked that sound. It was the sound of heavy things moving anyway. He was capping the radiator when the bike rolled in on a whisper and died. Not a whisper, he corrected himself, a cough held in the throat of a dragon that didn't want to show weakness. Matte black, low bars, a tank with a red Death's head wing nobody in Nevada needed introduced. The man on it coasted to the curb, boots skimming sparks from the rough concrete, and steadied 2 lives with 1 foot, his own, and that machine's. The rider took his helmet off like a man removing a crown he'd never asked for. Mid-40s, maybe, with a map of highways around his eyes and a gray seam in his beard. Leather vest stamped with patches Omari avoided naming out loud. When you named a thing, you invited it closer. The night air took a breath and waited. "Shop open?" the man asked, voice dry as gravel. "Closed," Omari said, because he was down to telling the truth even when it did nothing for him. "What's the trouble?" The rider gave a look that measured competency. Then he tapped the tank with a knuckle. "Trouble is I got too much road behind me and not enough gas left for what's ahead. Pump card's dead. Forgot cash in the last town. Stupid, I know. Station's 2 miles that way, but she won't get there." Omari glanced at the red wing on the man's vest. The skull stared back. He swallowed. "I got a can," he said. 5 gallons. But I've only got," he stopped himself. "Only got what?" the rider asked. He wasn't threatening, only paying full attention. It felt like the first time in days someone had. "Only got 20 in cash," Omari said, and immediately felt the shame rise hot as the night. "It's for my power bill. They cut it once already this summer." The rider's mouth twitched. "What's your name, brother?" "Omari." "I'm Ledger." The man's hand swallowed as in a shake that was brief and firm enough to be in agreement about something bigger than a name. "I'll pay you back. Tonight, if I can." "What's the going rate for kindness in Fernley?" "Same as everywhere," Omari said. "Too high." They stood in the washed-out glow of the baylight, 2 men with the same desert on their skin for different reasons. Omari went to the back closet and hauled out the red can that had been full for emergencies he'd been trying not to have. When he tipped the spout into the tank, the gas smell lifted memory like a lid, his father's hands cupping a tiny flame to light outboard engines in the sloughs back home. The old man's laugh when a stubborn motor finally coughed. He'd died 3 years ago, and in some moods Omari told himself that grief was just a check that kept clearing long after the account went empty. "You're a mechanic," Ledger said, watching with the easy patience of someone who'd had things repaired and broken more times than he could count. "Trying to be," Omari said. "Town small. People keep their trucks till the frames turn to lace. But you can't bill a man who brings you vegetables and a jar of pennies." Ledger nodded. "You got that look. The one that knows the world's ledger doesn't balance, and you're tired of being the unpaid line item." "Funny," Omari said, with your name. Yeah, Ledger said. He lifted the bike upright and rocked it gently, letting the fuel wet the throat. Names stick to you till the day something else tears them off. The engine fired reluctantly on the second try, then settled into a low heartbeat. The sound shivered Omari's ribs with the old boyhood awe of machines that refused to surrender. Ledger leaned close to be heard over it. I'll square up. What's your address? Omari shook his head, feeling both foolish and stubborn. If you say you'll pay, I believe you. I don't need your money to make me right with what I already did. He almost believed himself. Ledger gave him another look, a slow scan that took in the half-lit bay, the wires clipped back with plastic clamps because the conduit had to wait, the handwritten sign, please pay in full on pickup. He saw, perhaps, the way Omari stood a little sideways as if bracing for something coming from off the main road. Then thank you, Ledger said simply. He swung his helmet on, rolled his shoulders, and lifted 2 fingers in a salute that wasn't military but had the dignity of one. Road watch over you, Omari. He was gone in a peal of low thunder, tail light shrinking to a thumbnail ember swallowed by the straight line where Highway 58 the night. Omari stood with the empty gas can and listened to the trains again. Heavy things moving, whether anyone's prayers mattered or not. He locked up, killed the baylight he shouldn't be using after hours, and crossed to Lupita's. She opened the door without asking and placed a plate in his hands before he could object, 2 tacos and a scoop of rice rescued from the back of the line. Your face, she said, looks like a headlight that got rained on. He told her about Ledger. About the 20. Lupita made the sound people make when hope and if only hook their arms like girls on a sidewalk. Kindness, she said, is an engine that drinks the same fuel as fear. But the mileage is better. He ate standing at the counter while Lupita counted bills into an envelope for the church ladies' pantry, and then he walked home under a sky that had become a deep sea studded with shipwrecks. Nyla was in the window of their upstairs unit, a rectangle of gold light. She was 20 and too old and too young at the same time. Did you eat? She asked, and he lifted the empty takeout tray in proof. She hugged him anyway, nose wrinkling at the garage stink in his clothes. You smell like a hardware store had a heartbreak. Accurate, he said. You finish your essay? Trying, she said. She flopped back into the torn blue armchair and waved at the wall of Polaroids, Nyla with a thrift store cap and a nervous smile on the day she got her community college scholarship, Omari beside the sign when he first rented the bay, sunlight on his face like a dare. Their mother in a picture that never stayed straight. You didn't have to give that man your last cash, Nyla said, after a moment in which the night ticked like a cooling engine. I did, he said. I know I did. He didn't add the rest, because if he didn't, he would turn into the kind of man who said no to everything, and then what would be left? A shop with a closed door and a man who locked it. A life measured in what he kept. They talked of small things then, the essay, Lupita's new sign, the neighbor who sang off-key at 3 a.m. when his sorrow got a second wind. Omari lay down at last and watched the ceiling's hairline crack become a river running quiet from one corner of the room to the other. He was still awake when the first train of the new day blew a far horn like a question. Sleep came on after. Morning made the shop look honest and tired. He opened at 7. The sun came up with those thin, sharp shadows the desert makes when it's still deciding whether this will be a merciful day. He swept. He checked the appointment book that mostly contained promises and hand-drawn smiley faces from a kid who'd asked if he could help. He tightened the tie-down strap on the ancient compressor because when it walked it scared him. At 7:43 the landlord, Mr. Kaskin, arrived with a clipboard swallowing his chest and the posture of a man who had never asked for anything twice. Rent, he said, as if the word were a key that magically unlocked a change in Omari's pockets. You're 32 days behind. Friday, Omari said. The Balderas job pays out then. I'll square it. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Fields, Kaskin said, and of course he would be, because men with clipboards always wanted the moral bloom that came with their own version of honesty. I have another tenant interested. Vape shop. Young fellow with cash. I can't carry sentimental balances. It ain't a church. It's an auto bay, Omari said. Folks need those more than second-hand smoke and flavors of disappointment. Kaskin's mouth bent like something caught between gears. I'll give you till Monday. Papers already filed. After that, the chain goes on the door. Omari nodded. He would not plead. He would not explain that Ledger's 20 would have made a difference only to a number, not to the shape of a man's back when he walked down a hallway toward a bright door with somebody else's name on it. The landlord left with the particular satisfaction of someone who had moved a weight from one shoulder to another and called it justice. Omari turned the sign to open. Traffic started its slow trickle. A woman with a rattling Civic asked if he could listen to the sound and tell her whether it was expensive. He had the heart to say it depended on how loudly she hoped. He bled air from a tired suspension. He picked up the phone twice to call Balderas and ask about Friday, then set it down again because his voice would betray what he needed. At 9:15 a.m. shadow moved across the bay floor. He felt it before he heard it, the way animals feel pressure change before a storm. It was a sound like somebody had rolled thunder into a tight bundle and told it to hold itself together. Omari stepped into the doorway and squinted down West Main. They came in fours, then sixes, then in a long, rumbling tide. Bikes, mostly matte and black, some candy apple red that drank sunlight like a sin. Chrome like knives. Patches that made mothers pull kids closer. Helmets and bare heads. Sunglasses. Beards. A few women riding like North Stars with the same stern beauty. The line of them folded into the street as if the town were a pocket designed for this purpose. Neighbors emerged onto porches and curbs with phones up like shields. Omari's mouth went dry and then wet with the animal wet of sudden fear. The lead bike pulled even with his curb and cut its engine. The others obeyed a choreography that said they had done this before in places where the welcome depended on how you defined it. West Main became a river of quiet metal breathing, front wheels turned the same way as if they thought the same thought. Ledger dismounted. He pulled his helmet and hung it on his handlebar with a casual neatness that made Omari think of men who fold their coats even when they're burning buildings down inside. Ledger's eyes were less tired in daylight. Or more. There were men on either side of him who looked like decisions, one short and thick with a scar that ran through his eyebrow, one tall with a neck tattoo that disappeared into his shirt collar like a story you didn't get to hear the end of. Omari, Ledger said, as if the name were a town you could drive into. Morning. Good morning, Omari said, because he could still do ordinary words even when his heart had a wrench in it. Street seems busy. Ledger looked up and down West Main, then back. We figured we'd return what we owed. Hate to be late. Omari became acutely aware of the landlord's clipboard shape in the air, of the way Lupita had pushed her door open just an inch and held a dish towel like an amulet. The men on the bikes didn't swagger or shout. They watched. Waiting had weight. Ledger lifted a hand. A second bike, older, gleaming like a well-kept lie, eased forward with a steel case on its rack. The rider killed the engine, set the case down on Omari's oil-stained concrete, and backed away the exact same number of steps he'd taken forward. Ledger crouched with a creak of leather and popped the latches. Inside was not cash, as Omari's stomach had both hoped and dreaded. It was heavier. Tools. Not the cheap kit a man keeps under his seat. These were precise as arguments and beautiful the way certain knives are beautiful, snap ring pliers with black oxide finish, torque wrenches that clicked like punctuation, a Blue Point digital multimeter still in its plastic, a set of sockets with their sizes etched crisp in a language your hands learn before your mouth. There were 3 diagnostic dongles he'd only seen in catalogs, including one that talked to certain bike ECUs like a priest who'd grown up with sinners. Ledger touched the top layer and then stepped back. Heard you needed a different kind of cash, he said. The kind that makes money instead of gets counted. Omari didn't know how to hold his face. Gratitude is heavy when you've been starving. It can feel like another burden. You didn't have to. Ledger's laugh was a rasp that sanded some of the moment's shine down to where men like them could stand on it. You gave me what you had. We brought you what we had more of than we needed. He glanced around, clocked the phones, the faces half hidden behind curtains. Then he pitched his voice lower. Also brought you a choice. A choice? Omari repeated, because the word had a taste he hadn't sampled in a while. You keep fixing neighbors' trucks for jars of coins, Ledger said, gentle and brutally fair, or you start taking in bikes. There's a need. Not everyone in a patch wants to ride 60 miles for a man who knows these engines like prayers. We can send work. Good work? Cash work? He tilted his head. If you want it. Every nerve in Omari's body bristled at the obvious. Work from men with these patches wasn't just work. It was a witness. It said something about you before you opened your mouth. It might say it too loud. But the Bay's marrow knew how to lay hands on a V-twin in a way that honored what men built to outrun something. Why me? Omari asked, which was also, why now? Why push me into a story I might not be able to step out of later? Ledger's eyes crinkled. I ride a lot of miles, Omari. I can tell the difference between a man who wants to be paid and a man who wants to be square. You didn't ask for my last name. You didn't make a speech. You poured, and you believed me. Men like that fix things in a way that lasts. His throat tightened. He picked up one of the torque wrenches to have something to do with his hands. It fit like someone had taken a measurement he hadn't known he was giving the world. What's the catch? He asked, because he had learned to ask that question even of sunlight. Ledger shrugged in a way that made honesty seem like a practical tool. No catch. We don't make you ours because you work on our iron. People will talk. Your landlord, maybe. Cops might sniff around because they get allergic when they see this many of us in one place. But talk's wind. Money is weight. The only other thing is, if we send you work, and you treat one of our boys like a mark, that's the end of it. I treat nobody like a mark, Omari said, heat flaring before he could swallow it down. I treat machines like machines and people like they've got to make them run. Ledger nodded as if Omari had just recited a creed he respected. Then we're good. He lifted his chin. The tall one with the neck tattoo stepped up and placed a small envelope atop the tools as if setting a ring on a church railing. For the 20. And for your Friday. Omari didn't pick it up. He could feel the bill inside like heat through paper. He was aware in a new way of how still the street had become, the quiet like the held breath at the edge of a mistake or a miracle. He reached for the envelope. Sirens. Not the lazy yip of small-town cars. The stacked, harmonized wail of county and state and a frequency Omari had learned meant somebody up the chain wanted to be part of this story. The sound grew so fast it was as if the air itself were a fuse burning toward them. Phones came down. Curtains shut. Lupita's door went from an inch to a crack to flat. Ledger didn't move. He stood, a man in daylight who'd made choices before now and would make them again after. His riders rolled their shoulders and looked at one another and back, a current flowing in a school of fish you didn't want to see move in the same direction. 3 cruisers took the far end of West Main. 2 more the near. An SUV without external lights but full of the kind of presence that came stamped from federal buildings nosed in behind them like a black thought. Officers spilled and fanned and put hands where their lawyers had told them to put hands when there were cameras. A bullhorn cleared its throat. This is the Churchill County Sheriff. Hands where we can see them. Engines off. Nobody moves. The bikes were already dead quiet. Hands lifted, palms forward, 16 shades of oil and sun tattooed on the insides. Omari's hands rose before anyone asked. It felt like a posture he understood beyond the immediate reason. One of the deputies was young enough to still look like his prom date could have waited in the car. The sheriff, brought across the chest like a man who still did chores, wore the same expression he'd bring to a bull in the wrong pasture, respect laced with ready anger. The federal SUV opened and a woman stepped out in a navy windbreaker that said letters without saying them. She had a folder under one arm, her hair braided back in a no-nonsense road down the center of her skull. She scanned, saw Ledger, saw Omari, and narrowed her eyes as if she were trying to match their faces to names pinned to a corkboard in another kind of building. "Ledger Doyle," she said, "no bullhorn needed." Her voice carried fine. "And friends. You boys do love a parade." Ledger smiled with a tightness that didn't reach his eyes. "Agent Mallory," she supplied. "Let's keep this simple. We have an ongoing investigation. We have a warrant related to trafficking of stolen motorcycle parts and some other words you don't want read out loud while the phones are rolling. We can do this here on West Main with an audience, or we can do it at my office with the air conditioning. Your choice." Omari's stomach dropped so fast he could hear the rush of it in his ears. Stolen parts. He looked at the steel case in front of him like it had turned into a snake. He thought of the envelope. He thought of Kaskin with his chain for the door. He thought of Nyla's scholarship. He felt the town gather itself a little away from him, as towns do when a pot starts to boil and everyone wonders who will be scalded. "Ma'am," he said, throat dry. "I'm just a mechanic." Agent Mallory spared him a glance that took in the case, the empty gaskin by the wall like a witness who had already told his truth, the way Omari held himself in the door of his own shop as if unsure whether he was inside or outside. "What's your name?" "Omari Fields." "Mr. Fields, I suggest you step back from whatever that is and put your hands on your head for a moment so we can keep your day as uncomplicated as possible." Ledger's head turned. "Mallory," he said, and there was an old conversation in that one name. "We're not here to make trouble. We're here to square a debt." "Debts," Mallory said, "are why I have a job." The sheriff stood a deliberate foot closer to the riders. "Hands stay where I can see 'em," he said. "We're going to slow this down." Something changed in the air then, a barely perceptible tilt. Omari felt it in the bones of the building, in the glass panes of the shop windows that suddenly knew their own fragility. The tall rider, neck tattoo disappearing into his collar, shifted his weight. It was nothing. And it was the kind of nothing that turns into the first act of the rest of your life. Omari made a decision he did not have time to justify. He stepped forward and lifted the steel case with both hands, then carried it 3 feet back into his bay, past the painted line where the town street became his concrete, and set it on his workbench like a man returning a heart to a chest. "Sir," the sheriff barked. "Do not move that." "It's mine," Omari said, and the words surprised him by being true the moment they left his mouth. Not the case, he didn't know what the case was, not really, but the choice was his. The threshold was his. He had been without them so long he had to announce the fact to himself out loud. Ledger's face did a complicated thing, fear flicked through respect, and pride followed like a less cautious dog. Mallory pushed her lips together and hid something behind professionalism. The sheriff's hand hovered an inch higher over his holster. The riders breathed as one in a way Omari felt in his molars. "Mr. Fields," Agent Mallory said carefully, as if you were a civilian standing too close to a cliff. "I need you to step away. If that case contains stolen property, possession is 9/10 of a thing to explain to a judge." "I didn't steal it," he said, louder than he meant to. "I didn't ask for it. I didn't buy it. A man I helped brought me something I can use to earn a living, and," he swallowed, "and my landlord's putting a chain on my door Monday." The sheriff wasn't unmoved. Men who do chores understand the economics of dignity. But he had a street to keep from becoming a subject for a Dateline show. "We'll sort it, son," he said, and the son didn't sting because it wasn't diminishment, it was a link thrown across a gap. Something in Ledger set then, a ratchet clicking to a position that would hold under load. He took one step forward, not enough to scare anybody with good trigger discipline, but enough to say he, too, had thresholds he honored. "The case is clean," he said. "Bought and paid for. Receipts in the envelope. We don't bring heat to men who give us what little they've got." "Then we'll look at your receipt," Mallory said, the edge in her voice smoothing into something measured. She had the look of a woman who understood that making the right enemy at the wrong time could add a year to her life she didn't need. "But we're still serving this warrant." She lifted a hand. 2 agents peeled off to begin the slow, infuriating ballet of paperwork and presents. Omari stood with his palms on his workbench like a man bracing during an earthquake that hadn't yet decided if it would topple his house. The town watched. Nyla had texted twice, "You okay? Why are there bikes?" And he couldn't raise a hand to answer without making a gesture someone would misread. "Mr. Fields," Mallory said again, gentler now. "You want to keep your head out of a mess that isn't yours?" She flicked her eyes at Ledger. "He has a mess. He came to share gratitude." "Good. Now let us untangle the rest and you go inside. Lock your door. Make coffee. Pretend that what happens in the street is none of your business." Omari looked at Ledger. Ledger looked back, and in that look was a frank admission: men like us never get to pretend the street isn't our business. It always is. It's where we live. "Agent Mallory," he said, before he could convince himself silence would be safer. "He's right. That case is a gift. You can open it. There's tools. If one thing has a serial that don't belong here, you can take it. But leave me the rest. Please." The last word came out without pride, and that was its own kind of pride he hadn't practiced yet. Something cracked softly across town, maybe a trash bin lid in the wind, and all the bodies on West Main flinched by a hair, trained nervous systems measuring the difference between noise and threat. Mallory exhaled. "Open the envelope," she said to Omari. Slow. He slid it with a thumbnail. A receipt slid out, crisp. He held it at arm's length like a man displaying clean hands. The totals made his eyes go wet. Paid in cash at a chain store in Reno 2 nights ago. Half the tools in the case were listed by SKU. "And the other half?" Mallory asked Ledger, without looking away from Omari. "Older. From the club shop," Ledger said. "We keep spares. We don't keep much we don't pay for." The deputy with prum hair took the paper and jogged it to the sheriff. The sheriff ran a finger down the SKUs as if feeling for a vein. Mallory glanced toward her SUV, toward the radio inside that could give her a voice louder than this street. Then she made a small decision visible only in the muscles at the corners of her mouth. "Fine," she said. "We'll inventory on site. Nobody moves. Nobody smarts off. And if anyone reaches into a pocket for any reason but to scratch an itch, I will ruin your morning so thoroughly you'll talk about it at your next barbecue." A sound moved through the riders like laughter pressed flat to be polite. Ledger's eyes flicked to Omari's, and Omari felt a strange calm unspool in his chest. Not safety, never that, but a measured space in which he could breathe. The agents stepped into the street. One of them came toward Omari's bench with a penlight and the efficient boredom of a man who had counted wrenches before. "You mind?" he asked, without waiting. "Mind?" "Every day," Omari said, and the agent's mouth twitched despite himself. He started lifting trays, reading numbers off, checking the receipt. The air took on a new texture, like humidity in a place that didn't have any. Omari realized what it was a second before the first sound confirmed it: another motor, alone, coming fast. The pitch was wrong for a cruiser, wrong for the bikes out front. It was thinner and mean in a way that said cosmetic anger trying to pass for the real kind. Ledger's head turned. The riders didn't move but somehow made a shape that said they could if they needed to, and would. Mallory's hand drifted toward her hip like a reflex she had learned not to scold in herself. The car, a white Challenger with a sunburned hood and too much decal for a man's actual courage, swung onto West Main. It rolled past the county cruisers slow, then stopped broadside across the far cross street like a man setting up a stage. The driver's window remained up. The tint was cheap. 3 shapes inside moved like people rehearsing a play they'd written in the parking lot of a wrecked bar. The sheriff swore softly. "Not today," he said to the hot blue sky. "Not on my street." He lifted the bullhorn again. "Move along." The Challenger didn't move. Its engine revved, a theater noise. One of the shapes in the back leaned forward. Something metallic flashed briefly in the slit of tint near the top edge. Omari's scalp tried to pull his whole body backward by handfuls of hair. Ledger's voice dropped several degrees until it sounded like the engine at the center of the earth. "Omari," he said without turning his head, "go inside." Omari didn't. His hands stayed on his bench, which had known his weight since he signed the lease with a pen that wrote like it cost more than hope. He thought of Nyla's cracked blue armchair. He thought of Lupita and her dish towel. He thought of Kaskin and his chain. He thought of Agent Mallory with her braid, her folder, her choices. He thought of a $20 bill, and the way some debts you pay by you membership in a story you didn't plan on. The Challenger's front passenger window glided down like a lid. The barrel that pushed through it was not a toy. Agent Mallory shouted. The sheriff shouted louder. The riders didn't shout at all. Ledger's hand moved a quarter-inch toward nothing in particular and then stopped because he had outlived enough mornings to know how quickly a small thing can become all of it. Omari's last clear thought before the street broke was this: you put fuel in a thing, and it burns. And then the first shot cracked the glass of his bay window into a spider the size of a man's last good plan. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The bay window laced itself white, the crack spreading so fast Omari swore he could hear the geometry. A second shot punched a neat dark coin through the spider's abdomen and glass pebbled down across his bench, one tinkling avalanche after another. The town flinched as one organism. Somewhere to his right, Lupita screamed and smothered the sound with both hands as if she could fold it and hide it in her apron. "Down!" Sheriff Hollis roared. The order reached everyone differently. Riders dropped behind their bikes like seasoned infantrymen. The prom-faced deputy dived sideways and skinned his cheek. Agent Mallory moved in a low line toward the SUV, drawing without haste, braids snapping once like a flag. Omari did not dive. He moved with the unglamorous intelligence of a man who understands mass and timing. His left hand swept the steel case of tools into the shadow of the bench, his right found the red handle for the roll-up bay door and yanked. The spring howled, the door came down with a rattle just as a third shot spat a fist-sized chip from the cinder block where his head had been. The shop's light changed, daylight cut to a gray bar under the door, dust motes whirled like a shaking galaxy. He tasted metal and old oil and the sweet chlorinated edge of panic. Nyla's text buzzed his pocket again. He wanted to answer "I'm here," but his hands belonged to the moment now. "Fields." Agent Mallory's voice came tight through the gray. "Stay inside." He was inside. But inside wasn't safe. The bay's side door opened into the alley that paralleled West Main before it bent toward the diner's kitchen entrance. He pictured Lupita flat against the counter, dish towel to her mouth. He pictured the Challenger's line of fire. He pictured 20 small changes and what each would buy and cost. Omari grabbed the heavy, green-banded CO2 extinguisher from the wall, the one you needed 2 hands to baby. He slung it into his left arm like a baby that had maybe just saved your life and slid to the side door, keeping low. The alley baked old grease in summer. He counted to 5, because men who fix things know the value of waiting one heartbeat longer than you want to. At 5 he busted into a crouching run, extinguisher thumping his thigh. The back of Lupita's diner stood 20 paces away, white paint flaking like a molting snake. Out front the world was shouting metal. Back here a single fly hummed as if impressed. 2 more shots. Then the sudden, eerie quiet of men choosing new positions. Omari hit the diner's back door with his shoulder. Lupita almost brained him with a skillet, then recognized him and collapsed the fraction she could spare. "Go," she whispered, hands on his elbows, the skillet hanging like a moon. "Go help. I'll call your sister." "Lock it behind me," he said, and the lock clicked like a promise between people who had both kept too many. He cut through the kitchen to the dining room's crack of light. The street beyond looked wrong, like a photograph printed on a fabric that had wrinkled. Cruisers in a staggered line, riders in dark knots. Agent Mallory leveled on the Challenger. Sheriff Hollis shouted something about a gun, his voice came square and steady, a barn wall between a storm and the animals inside. The Challenger's passenger leaned out, gun held badly, as if he'd only ever pointed one at beer cans. The barrel skittered left then right, corrections little and late. He fired high. Plaster sneezed from the diner's sign. The riders didn't return fire. The convoy's violence was not the kind that wastes ammunition to look big. The bikes themselves made a wall, angled front ends, armored by tanks, chrome now useful in ways the law would never write down. Omari. Ledger's voice found him at the diner's door like a hand in the dark. The biker stayed tucked behind the curve of his front wheel, one knee down, helmet on the bar. His eyes flicked fast to count assets and exits. Stay put. Like hell, Omari breathed, then louder, cover. He popped the extinguisher's pin and shouldered the door. The first cold blast smashed into noon heat, a white cloud immediate and blinding. People always think extinguishers are fire's enemies alone. They are also truth's enemies. You can blind a whole scene with a hiss. The foam fogged the Challenger's windshield, the driver swore, a crackly teenage sound in a grown machine. Agent Mallory moved in the cloud like a memory. Sheriff Hollis stepped around his car, fast and low. The passenger panicked and squeezed the trigger again. The shot went wild into white and hit the prom-faced deputy in the thigh. The kid screamed, then bit it down because men with badges in small towns do not like to cry where their uncles can see them on video. Blood ran in a black stream down his pant leg and puddled on asphalt heated to the temperature of complicated decisions. Hold, the sheriff barked, voice anchoring men to themselves. Omari didn't think. He ran. The extinguisher trailed foam and he half-tossed, half-rolled behind the line of bikes until his hand found the deputy's belt. I'm with you, he said, too calm for how his heart kicked. He tore his shop rag from his back pocket, looped it high above the wound, and twisted until the flow slowed to a mean ooze and the deputy hissed through his teeth like a kettle. Fields, Agent Mallory said somewhere in the fog. Stay down. It wasn't an order this time, it was a request made in the accent of a person who hates writing the kind of paperwork men like Omari end up starring in. Copy, he said, because he needed the deputy to hear calm words and because it cost him nothing to let Mallory pretend this moment was inside her plan. The fog thinned. The Challenger saw shapes through it, decided that confidence was a weapon sharp enough, and dropped the clutch. The back end swung. Tires screamed, too much throttle, not enough brain. The car fishtailed, bumper wagging. It would clear the side street if it didn't hit the cruiser, and then Omari saw where it would go, straight at the row of parked bikes and, behind them, whatever flesh had trusted metal. He threw the extinguisher again, harder, at the exact place he'd aimed to hit a ball on a fresh sodded field, the front passenger tire. The canister weighs enough. Physics did what it always does for men who respect it. The tire blew, a good rubber bang, and the Challenger's nose went heavy and sullen and wrong. The driver jerked and the car stuffed itself into the curb, rim kissing concrete with a shriek. Agent Mallory was there when it stopped, gun steady. The sheriff was there, too, breath coming through his nose like the horse he'd learned to ride before he learned to wear a badge. Out, Mallory said. Hands. The driver climbed, blustering courage draining with the tire. The passenger came slower, gun gone, a boy in a man's body. The back seat shape melted into language about how none of this was his idea. Cuffs clicked, the practical music of a morning rescued from stupidity. Silence fell. It had a pulse, the deputy's breaths, Ledger's low words to his men, the tick of hot metal settling. Then town noise crawled back up from its ditch. A baby wailed. Someone laughed the way people laugh when the knife missed them. Omari let go the rag. The blood had slowed enough the tourniquet could hold without him. You're okay, he told the deputy, with the authority of a man who had decided it so. Hurts like fire, the kid said, gray around the mouth and trying not to disgrace either himself or the uniform. Thank you. Thank me when you're old enough to complain about your knee in winter, Omari said, and the deputy made a breath that might have been a laugh if it had more air in it. Agent Mallory holstered, then looked up and saw Omari, saw the busted tire, saw the extinguisher dent like a thumbprint in a bad idea. She approached with a brief softening of the eyes that was not yet a smile. I told you to stay inside, she said. It could have been anger. It wasn't. You told me to keep my head out of a mess, he said, wiping glass dust from his cheek with his clean hand. This was my street. She inclined her head as if she were in court and a point had been conceded by law. Ambulance is 2 minutes out. Deputy's going to be fine. I'm going to ask you for a statement because that's the game, Mr. Fields. But before I do that, she glanced at Ledger, then back, I'm going to say I appreciate the way you measure a moment. Ledger approached then, moving carefully through the spent fog. He stopped outside arm's length, respect is learned, too, and looked over Omari for holes. Finding none, his shoulders let down a notch. You throw like a man who used to play, he said. Only if the ball rattled when it rolled, Omari said. His legs felt like a boy's after the first long day of summer. He realized he was shaking and hid his hands by folding them across his chest as if cold. Sirens dopplered away. The street began to be a street again, people emerging, taking down their phones as if the mystery had left the show, leaving only cleanup. The arrested men sat on a curb, wrists ironed behind them. One had tears, real ones, the relief and shame kind. He couldn't be 25. Omari wanted to be angrier than he was. He had been poor enough to know that stupidity has a shape when it grows in a garage where no adult has wiped a boy's hands and taught him the names of tools. Look at me, the sheriff said to the kid on the curb, in the tone of a father trying to save his son from a worse father. The boy looked. You could have killed 10 people. You didn't. Spend the rest of your breath making sure that math holds. Nyla came pelting down the alley then, hair unbraided and flying, a hoodie thrown over pajamas that had lost their argument. Omari. She hit his chest at speed and then held him away at arm's length to look for blood. You're okay. I saw, there were, and Lupita called, and she folded him again, smaller and older than her years, then stepped back and wiped both cheeks with the heels of her hands like a fighter clearing sweat. Who are all these men? Ledger nodded to her as if introduced in a living room. Friends, he said, voice respectful and not pretending anything it wasn't. Your brother gave me gas last night when I didn't have cash. We came back heavy with thank you. Nyla's eyes darted to the case on the bench like a magnet had taken hold behind her face. We don't need trouble, she said, not unkindly. We need rent. We brought both less and more than trouble, Ledger said. He bent, lifted the steel case as if it weighed the right amount to make a point, and set it in Omari's doorway. Agent Mallory, you inventory that to your heart's content. You'll find SKUs and receipts and a club stamp on the rest. We came clean. Mallory studied Ledger like a teacher watching a smart kid pretend to be dumber than he is. You came visible, she said. There's a difference. Sometimes, Ledger said, and there was a truth hanging there neither of them loved. The ambulance took the deputy and the last of the sirens out of town. The sheriff posted 2 uniforms at either end of West Main, then walked the length of the convoy, hands on his hips like a man considering a field with a new fence through it. You fellas planning to be here all day? Ledger shook his head. No, sir. We came to return a favor, took some heat, and we'll roll. But we'll be back with work. Legit. If Mr. Fields wants it. His eyes moved to Omari as if to deliver the decision back where it belonged. Omari looked at Nyla. She watched him with hope and terror braided together. He thought of Kaskin and the chain. He thought of bikes coming in on hot afternoons and leaving smoother than they arrived. He thought of paper trails and forensic accountants and Agent Mallory's plucked eyebrow when a man lied to her. I want it, he said, then added, on terms. His voice surprised him again by being steady enough to put under a roof. Ledger's mouth twitched. Let's hear them. 1. Nothing stolen. I won't touch a bike with a ground-down VIN. If I smell heat on a part, it doesn't cross my threshold. 2. No trade in favors. Money for work, receipts both directions. 3. If law shows up, I don't hide anyone. I run a shop, not a church. He glanced at Mallory. No offense. Churches hide fewer sinners than you think, Mallory said dryly, which earned her an involuntary small laugh from Lupita at the door. Ledger nodded each term like a man ratcheting bolts to spec. Done, he said. And 4, our bikes go to the back of the line if one of your townsfolk needs their truck to get to work. Respect is a tool, too. Omari hadn't asked for a 4th. But he recognized a gift when it made itself fit. Done, he echoed, and they shook in the doorway of the life he was building, the street's dust rising around their boots like a benediction nobody in authority could have written without ruining. Agent Mallory cleared her throat softly. I will be back, she said to Omari, not a threat. To do the inventory. To ask for your statement. To look you in the eye again. I won't pretend I can't connect dots, I'm paid to. But I also won't confuse a man who throws a fire extinguisher at a moving car with a man who runs a chop shop. Thank you, Omari said. He meant it the way a man thanks a doctor who hasn't yet cured him but has decided to try. The convoy idled. One by one, engines turned over, a shared, soft thunder. Ledger pulled on his helmet, paused, and touched 2 fingers to his vest where a man might wear a medal if his life ran different. Road watch over you, Omari, he said again. We'll be in touch. The bikes peeled out not in a show but in a slow parade, a leaving that told a story. We were here, we are not ashamed, we have places to be that are not your problem unless you make them so. West Main widened behind them like a river that had remembered its banks. When the last tail light winked to a coin and then to no thing, the town exhaled. Lupita crossed to Omari with a broom. We sweep, we cook, we pray, she said. In that order. Because God likes a clean kitchen. They swept. The glass made a sound like small bones forgiving. Nyla taped a sheet of plastic over the toothy hole the bullet had torn in the window. The tape jagged at first and then Martha Stewart straight because that's who she was when the world tried to be crooked. Kaskin arrived just in time to be the man everyone wanted to dislike. He stood on the sidewalk with his clipboard in his mouth already forming a sentence about liability. Then he saw the blood ghost on the asphalt where the deputy had lain and his shoulders lost a small fraction of their certainty. What in, he started, then tried a different opening. You all right? I will be, Omari said. Monday's still Monday? He waited without asking for mercy. Dignity is a bill you pay whether anyone sees you settle it. Kaskin opened his clipboard. Paper gleamed. He closed it again. I can give you, he looked at Lupita, at Nyla's taped square, at Agent Mallory talking to the sheriff under a sky now indecently calm. I can give you to end of the month. But I need a plan. Not promises. Here's my plan, Omari said, and surprised himself with how much of it already had shape. I put in bike racks in a second lift. I start taking 2 a day. I prioritize trucks in the morning so they make shift change. I raise my oil change price because I've been trying to be a friend instead of a business. Lupita feeds the waiting room 3 days a week and we split whatever kindness comes from that. I keep receipts that make a bookkeeper cry with joy. I pay you every Friday at 4 until you are sick of my face. Kaskin's face did a thing like surprise learning it could be generosity. Bring me the first envelope this Friday, he said. We'll pretend I am a human being for as long as you keep being one. When he left, Nyla sank into the blue armchair she and Omari had dragged from a yard sale into the shop as a joke. She kicked the toe of her sneaker against his boot the way she used to when they were kids on church steps, not allowed to run but needing to move. You were very brave, she said. I was very scared, he said. That's the same thing, she said. One of them just feels nicer to talk about at dinner. He laughed then, a short, grateful sound that startled the room into admitting it could hold laughter again. The afternoon unspooled into practicalities. Mallory took his statement and wrote it down in a hand neat enough to convince you hadn't lied even if you had wanted to. She inventoried the case with a junior agent who read off SKUs in a voice more accustomed to fantasy football stats. She tagged 2 old wrenches with the club's stamp, she left the rest. Don't make me regret my good mood, she said at the end, and it sounded more like a blessing than a threat. In the days that followed, the street remembered itself by degrees. Folks came by with casseroles like an infection the church ladies meant to start on purpose. The deputy's mother brought a pound cake that could have been classified as an analgesic. A man Omari didn't know dropped off a box of earplugs because his cousin's shop had a compressor too, and you lose hearing by being proud about it. On Wednesday the first bike rolled up, a road king with a front end that hummed at idle like a story about a better city. Its rider took off his helmet, looked at the sign that said Fields Auto, and then looked at Omari as if asking permission to revise the name in his head to something that fit both trucks and thunder. "I heard you don't waste words," he said. "I need someone who doesn't waste torque." Omari grinned despite himself. "Roll her in." He built a rhythm that week, mornings heavy with F-150s and Civic belt squeals, afternoons given to cruisers and the particular patience their owners had learned carrying luggage of a different sort. Ledger didn't return, not in the noisy way. Work did. Cash did, counted and receipted. The town didn't talk at once, it adjusted the way people do in places where everybody will still be seeing everybody in the same aisle of the same grocery in 2 days. Friday arrived like men who owe money measure time. At 3:58 Omari washed his hands until the creases returned to their proper color and the oil gave up sulking. He filled an envelope with bills and a receipt copy with carbon paper so blue it looked like an old bruise. He walked to Kaskin's office and set it on the desk without apology. Kaskin took it without flourish, counted fast, and then slower as if he wanted to believe something for once. "See you next Friday," he said, and Omari realized he was being given the compliment of boredom. That night, after Nyla fell asleep with a textbook tenting her chest, Omari pulled a milk crate to the shop's open door and sat. The desert sang cricket hymns in a key for men whose names nobody had thought to put on buildings yet. He sipped Lupita's cinnamon coffee and watched the empty length of West Main where, a lifetime ago, a convoy had blocked the street. He wondered what his father would have said about a boy who saved a deputy with a rag and stopped a car with meth. He must have dozed. When he opened his eyes, the night had thickened into that particular hour when even neon gives up and lets the dark be itself. He heard them before he saw them, the polite, rolling thunder of men who have learned how to enter a town without waking babies. 5 bikes. Not 20. Enough to be a statement that didn't try too hard to be one. They idled to the curb. Ledger swung off the lead and left his helmet on. Some nights a man doesn't need to show his face to be understood. "Evening," he said. His voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with miles. "We didn't come for work." Omari's mouth tightened. "You came for trouble?" Ledger's head canted. "We came to end a piece of it." He lifted a small canvas bag and handed it over like a report card he wasn't proud of. Inside, wrapped in a t-shirt from a club charity ride, were 3 pistols and a handful of raw-knuckled apologies in the shape of spare magazines. "Those boys in the Challenger," Ledger said, tone judicial, not cruel. "They thought they could earn a stripe by snatching bags off our girls in Reno last week. We'd been looking. They heard we were here this morning and drove up to pose for your cameras. That's not how we want our name in your town. We had a talk." He pointed his chin at the bag. "You don't owe me any feelings about what that means. But I don't bring shooters into a place where a man just saved one of my riders' lives by asking for receipts." Omari set the bag on the bench like a dead thing found in a river. His stomach turned once in a small, practical circle. He wasn't naive, he was choosing to be particular. "I can't take that," he said. "I can't keep it. I can't dispose of it. That's why I brought it to a woman with a windbreaker and a braid," Ledger said. Mallory stepped into the light then, the kind of coincidence that never is. She had walked in behind the bikes like a sentence needing a period. Ledger gave her the bag without flinch. "You and me," he said to Mallory, "will keep talking. But we'll do it without letting children think guns are jewelry." Mallory's eyes flicked to Omari, amused and tired. "I wish all my informants were this polite," she said. Ledger's eyebrow rose. "Relax," she added. "If I wanted you to be an informant, I'd ask your mother to cook me dinner and we'd start from there." The handoff took 10 seconds and an eternity's worth of negotiations. Men and women like these learned to keep quiet. When it was done, Ledger looked at Omari for a long beat. "You did good work this week," he said. "There's a run on Sunday. We ride for a kid's leukemia fund up in Tahoe. You and your sister come up, eat bad burgers, watch me lose an arm wrestling match I should have won, and remember there's more to men like us than the movies tell. Nyla's voice floated from the dark behind them, sleepy and delighted. Did someone say Tahoe? Ledger laughed, a real one this time. Bring the blue armchair. We'll put it on a trailer. Make a throne. Sunday looked like a family reunion nobody believed they had been invited to until they saw their name handwritten on a name tag. The convoy swelled at the edge of town and grew again near the river, riders bending the road to their will in that elegant way only people with scars and practice manage. Omari rode in Lupita's battered truck with Nyla, windows down, radio on a station that played songs even their mother would have allowed. At the park near the lake, Ledger introduced Omari to a man who ran a machine shop out in Sparks and a woman who taught physics at the college in Reno and tuned a carb like she was filing a grant proposal. People handed Nyla raffle tickets and told her to pick the ones that looked heavy with winning. She did. They won a basket of microbrews and laughed until they cried because they didn't drink and Lupita traded them for empanadas on the spot. At dusk, as the lake took the color of old coins, Ledger sat with Omari on a curb. Families drifted. Someone's kid slept on a blanket, thumb anchored in his mouth like a prayer. This, Ledger said, and gestured to the ordinary holiness in front of them, is the Ledger I try to keep. I was 20 once. I didn't have a garage man to tell me which bolt I was trying to strip. I had a man who told me if I wanted to be a monster, I could skip the practice and go straight to the test. I've been unlearning him for 20 years. Omari nodded. My father taught me to hold a wrench like a promise, he said. He didn't get to teach me enough else. I'm learning the rest by giving away $20 I didn't have. Ledger looked at him sideways. Funny thing about debt, he said. Some of it makes you smaller. Some of it makes you big enough to stand upright. You bought us a morning. We bought you a door to your future. Call it even until the next good thing asks for us. They rode back in an evening that had decided on kind. West Main appeared, untroubled. The shop, his shop, held the day's heat like a secret it would share back in December. Lupita had taped a new sign to the inside of his window with the square neatness of a woman born to fix, bikes welcome, receipts required. Work came. More than he thought. Work of both kinds, the kind that pays a bill and the kind that knots men together who might otherwise be the wrong kind of alone. The sheriff brought his old F-150 and pretended he'd been meaning to have the tie rod ends done for months. Mallory swung by for coffee and, once, to lean on the counter and ask Nyla about her essay on Baldwin as if the question might be the most important thing this street had heard in a while. On a Tuesday 3 weeks after the glass spidered, Omari found a letter under the shop door with his name in block capitals that didn't try to be beautiful. Inside was a money order for 3 months' rent and a note that said, Your 20 kept my old man from running out of gas in a different way once. I owed the road. Now I owe you. R. He showed it to Nyla and they both stared the way people stare at the ocean their first time, without a vocabulary and with a suspicion the right words exist anyway. In November, when the first cold walked the street like a nosy stranger, Agent Mallory came by with a sheet of paper folded twice. We closed that case, she said. The boys in the Challenger are pleading out. The gun's ledger, she shook her head at her own pun, is clean for now. Keep it that way. I will, Omari said. Then, because the truth had begun to fit him better than silence, he added, Thank you for not making me part of a story I didn't write. She nodded, as if that were all either of them had wanted. On the 1-year mark, the convoy came quiet at dawn. 10 bikes, not 20. They parked without blocking the street. Ledger stepped off and set a small plaque on Omari's counter like an invoice for a different kind of work, Fields Auto, we fix what runs and what runs US. Under it, small, respect as a tool. Omari hung it in the waiting corner above the blue armchair. Lupita cried. Nyla pretended she had dust in her eye and then laughed at herself hard enough to prove otherwise. Sheriff Hollis ran a calloused finger over the letters and said nothing because some men learn that saying less makes the words you use worth more. That afternoon, Omari stood in the doorway of the bay where his life began again and watched West Main do what streets do, hold the weight of everyone trying. He thought of the spider glass and the extinguisher and the way a $20 bill can become a bridge if you hand it to the right man at the right time. He thought of receipts and SKUs and the simple holiness of charging fairly. Nyla came to stand beside him and leaned her shoulder into his. "We did it," she said. "We're doing it," he corrected, because nothing was finished and because he had learned to love the present tense like a road that never lied. "Tomorrow," she said, "I have class at 9. You'll be open?" "I'll be open," he said. "And if the door sticks, I'll fix the hinge." They stood that way while the sun slid behind the tanks at the edge of town and the trains started their low talk, heavy things moving anyway. Somewhere far down the highway, thunder rolled that wasn't weather. He couldn't tell if the sound was coming or going. He only knew that if a bike coasted in on a cough at closing time, he would pour, he would believe, and he would keep a ledger nobody could audit except the man who looked back at him in the grease-streaked window. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.